So this is chapter one. These are your notes that are going to be online. Your homework every night will be to watch a video and take notes on it. I want to keep the notes to approximately, or the videos I should say, to approximately 8 to 12 minutes long so that it's not too long for you guys. I know you'll be doing a lot of pausing and rewinding and things of that nature, so I want to try to keep it as short as possible for you. And like I said, hopefully between 8 and 12 minutes. So this is the introduction to Providence stats. What is statistics? Statistics is the science of conducting studies to collect, organize, summarize, analyze, and draw conclusions from data. Keep those 5 pieces in mind throughout the entire semester. They really, all 5 stand on their own, meaning that collecting can be done by one group, organizing the data can be done by another, summarizing it can be done by a third, analyzing and drawing conclusions, and so on. It's not that one person has to do all of those. A lot of times they are done by different groups. Maybe not 5 groups, but more than one. The other thing about Providence stats, I think it should be a class that's required of all high school students. It's something that you will use a great deal no matter what you go into in college. Anybody taking AP Psych this semester, you will find out how much you use statistics. It's something that's probably the most widespread use of any of your mathematics courses. Data, a variable, is a characteristic or attribute that can assume different values. We're talking anything from numbers, colors, true and false, so on. Once you collect all of those, that's known as data. So those are all the different values that the variables can assume. Keep in mind that they can be measured, or they can be something that's just observed. And when you put all that data collection, or that data that you collected together, that is known as a data set. Different types of statistics. The first one is descriptive. That consists of the collection, organization, summarization, and presentation of data. And then you have inferential statistics, which is generalizing from samples to populations, performing estimations and hypothesis tests, determining relationships among variables, and making predictions. So it's really 2 different types, almost 2 different branches of statistics. The first one is really the collection, organization, summarizing it. It's really dealing with only the facts and just showing the data. And the second part is inferential, which is taking all of that data and trying to maybe tell the future, or decide we need more of this, less of that, so on and so forth. And finally, probability, which we get into much more later on in the semester, but that is just the chance of something happening. And in order to tell probability, many times you need statistics. Then we have different kinds of groups. The first group is a population, and that is all the subjects that are being studied. Keep in mind that this could be people, animals, objects, When you think population, a lot of times we think of the human population, but it is definitely not limited to only people. The next little group is a sample, which is just part of a population. Many times you are not able to gather information from the entire population. Therefore, researchers rarely use the entire population. Many times they just pick a sample, which is just a selection of the population. For instance, if we wanted to know about all the students at BHS, it would take a lot of work to go around and ask every single student what they thought about something. You would have students who are absent. Therefore, when they get back to school, you would have to then go out again and find out the ones that you missed. You would maybe have students up at the Career and Technical Center. So if you're going around third hour asking everybody and they're not here, again, you have to make sure that the next day you go back and ask them. So it's something that is very hard to do, to make sure that you ask everybody in the population. That is why many times they just take a sample. So a sample of BHS, you would have to make sure that you ask a few freshmen, a few sophomores, a few juniors, and a few seniors. And you would have to make sure that you don't only get freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors who are taking maybe a foods class or something at the Career and Technical College or a musical class. Reason is, if you're only asking freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors who are in a music class about something, that does not accurately represent the entire BHS population, because not everybody's taking a music class. So you really have to make sure that you mix it up, that you are getting a fair mixture of the entire population. So it's really a tricky thing when you're trying to pick a sample of picking the right people. Variables. There are a few different types of variables. The first one is qualitative variables. Those are variables that can be placed into distinct categories according to some characteristic of attribute. Think of things you can't really measure. Think qualities. When you say a quality about a person, sometimes you're thinking they're nice, they're mean. That could be a qualitative variable. We're talking eye color, hair color, things that usually you can't assign numbers to. The next one is quantitative variables, and those are things that you can assign a number to. I don't want you to think that numbers always mean quantitative, because they don't. If, for instance, we were talking, I'm drawing a blank right now. I'll come back to that later. But don't think that quantitative is always numbers, or that it absolutely, sorry, don't think that when it's a number it has to be quantitative, because that is not correct. Most of the time it is quantitative, but just because it's a number does not mean it has to be. Okay? Quantitative can be broken down into two groups: discrete, those are things that can be counted, and continuous. Those are things that you can assume an infinite number of values between two specific values. So if we were talking about how many ounces a cup holds, or if we were measuring how many ounces are in a cup, we could continue to get more and more and more detailed about how many ounces are in that cup. We could say 12 ounces, and then you could say, no, it's 12.1. Then you could say, no, it's 12.12. Well, it's actually 12.128. And you could keep going and going and going and get more and more and more accurate. That's continuous. Discrete would be something like how many students are in the class. Well, it is counting. It's 1, 2, 3. You can't say 2.5 students, because a student, you can't have half of them in a classroom. Also, we're going to be looking at boundaries of continuous variables. Make sure that when we are rounding continuous variables, that you remember 0.5 is rounded up and 0.4 and below is rounded down. Now, that's actually up to 0.5, but not including 0.5. So what I'm talking about is if we had a group that was the value of 3, anything with 2.50 up to 3.4999 repeating forever would be considered 3. Once you hit 3.5, that moves up to the next category. Different measurement scales. We have nominal level of measurement. Classifies data into non-overlapping categories in which no order or ranking can be made. We're talking about eye color, race, religion, ordinal. Those are categories that can be ranked, but there's not really a difference between the ranks, meaning small, medium, or large. The difference between a small and medium may be different than the difference between a medium and a large. So if a small soft drink holds 12 ounces, a medium holds 16, that's a difference of 4 ounces. A large may hold 24, and that's a difference of 8 between the medium and large. So small, medium, and large, there's not the same difference between them. Interval, that ranks data, and precise differences between the units do exist. However, there's no meaningful zero. So we're talking about something like temperature. The difference between 43 and 44 and 45 degrees is all the same. However, when we get down to 0, 0 does not mean that there's no temperature. So when we talk about no meaningful 0, 0 does not mean none. Okay? It has a value, but it doesn't mean 0. It doesn't mean what it says. And then you have ratio. Those possess all the characteristics of interval measurement, except there does exist a true 0. And in addition, true ratios exist when the variable is using two different members of the population. So what we're talking about there is something like height and weight. If you have a weight of 0, that means you have no weight. So in this case, there is an actual 0. What we're talking about with two different ratios is weight could be pounds and ounces. Height is much more common. We use 6 feet, 4 inches. So there's two different ratios there. Different ways of sampling. When you're sampling, you could do something such as random, meaning randomly go out and pick somebody off the street, pick somebody out of a class. That's random. There's also systematic. Systematic would be like picking every 4th person who walks through the door. So you do have a system to it. It is fairly random, but it's not just saying I want that person, that person, that person. It's I want the 4th person and then the 4th person and then the 4th person. Excuse me. Stratified is when you are picking people from each group, meaning if you want to take a sample of the Bismarck High School, you would have to pick a few people from freshman class, a few people from sophomore, junior, and senior. You would have to make sure that you pick a few people from each group. And then finally, a cluster. A cluster is when you pick an entire group. If we wanted to know something about the senior class at BHS, we could walk in and just say, I want this entire economics class, because those are all seniors. It may not be the best way, but you have all seniors in there, and you are just picking one group to represent the entire population. And lastly, convenience. Convenience is picking people who will just who are available to you. If you wanted to know something about the population in Bismarck, one easy way would be going to the mall and just asking people. It doesn't mean it's always very accurate, because you're looking at only people who will go out and visit the mall on a Saturday or Sunday or whenever you go. You're missing all the people who maybe only shop online. Getting close. 3 slides left. Types of studies. You have an observational study. And this is where the researcher merely observes what is happening or what has happened in the past and tries to draw conclusions based on these observations. And then you have an experimental. And that's where the researcher manipulates one of the variables and tries to determine how the manipulation influences the other variables. So the big difference is the observational, the researcher does not interact with the subjects at all. It just sits back and watches what happens. Experimental, the researcher is looking for cause and effect. Okay, if I do this, what happens? Then we have independent versus dependent. An independent variable is one that is being manipulated by the researcher. The dependent variable is the one that is studied to see if it's changing. The way I always look at it or try to remember it is this variable depends on something else. So the dependent variable is the one that's supposed to change depending on what the other variable does. And then you always have to keep in mind confounding variables. That's a variable that influences the dependent or outcome variable, but was not separated. For instance, if we wanted to see if a certain exercise regimen causes a person to lose weight, a confounding variable may be the fact that while these people are exercising, they also may be eating better. So the eating part is your confounding variable. That's causing them to lose more weight. Not saying that the exercise is not, but if they change their diet, that's also helping them lose the weight. And finally, back to groups, you have a treatment group, which is a group that receives special treatment. You have your control group, and that is the group that does not receive any special treatment. Most of the times you always want to have both, because you want to see how does the normal group act, and then you also want to see how does whatever we are doing affect the group. So that's the treatment group. While doing that, there's always something called the Hawthorne effect. And that is, does the fact that the individuals know they're being watched change their behavior, which then could affect the outcome? So your control group may actually change the way they're thinking or change the way they act just because they know they're being watched. And so, and that can happen to the treatment group as well. So is it whatever the treatment group is going through that is causing the changes, or is it just something mental that they know they're being watched? Okay. I know this was a little bit longer than I had said, the 8 to 12 minutes, and it's because it's pretty much the first chapter, the entire first chapter all in one. We'll never go through the entire chapter all at once again. The reason I did this is I want you to look through your notes, see if there's anything important that you missed that I may have gone over. Also, if there's some of the little things that I said that you would like to add to your notes as examples, I suggest you do that. And finally, while you're going through your notes, make sure that you have a little section of questions that you can ask. A lot of times when you're going through here, the downfall of not doing this in class is you may have a question that you would normally ask and you can't because you're sitting here watching on the computer. So make sure that you write down a lot of those questions, and the next day feel free to ask me, whether it's in front of the entire class or just on some of the work time. Okay. Thanks for the first video. Like I said, sorry it took so long. This will hopefully be one of the longer ones.